Hello and welcome to this morning's webinar. Today we're talking about why my horse spooks, and I know a lot of you have horses that spook and it's quite scary and it's very easy to fall off a horse that spooks. I've certainly done so myself on more than one occasion, and I wanted to sort of try and get to the bottom of why your horse is spooking and of course what you can do about it to help you and the horse. So spooking is an interesting thing. We call it shying. It's any time when your horse who makes a sudden change of direction or gets a fright at something. And horses will usually, if they get a fright at something, they'll move away to where they feel is a safe distance, and then they'll turn around and have a look at it. And so that can often also include throwing in a buck or two, especially with younger horses. If you watch them in the paddock and they get scared of something, they usually run in the opposite direction, bucking and kicking and carrying on. And you really don't want that happening when you're riding the horse. So let's first of all discuss what spooking tells us about the horse. And I think the most important thing that it's telling us is that the horse is anxious. So if you've got a horse that spooks, you've got an anxious horse. So that's something that we really need to address. The basic problem is then that your horse is not engaged with you. So we talk about horses being under stimulus control. And of course, the horse is always under some sort of stimulus control. So what we want is the horse to be under our stimulus control, not that of the environment. And so that's where we need to make changes. We need to get the horse under our stimulus control. And so another issue might be that your horse can't concentrate. So your horse is not very good at concentrating. And this can happen quite a lot with young horses or horses that haven't had much training. Or if you're asking your horse maybe to concentrate for too long as well. So, but there's things we can do to work on the horse's attention span too. So we'll talk about that a bit later. If your horse has had poor training history. Now, this can be a number of things, and people, you talk about poor training history and people sort of immediately think, oh, the horse has been abused, but it's not that at all. People with the best intentions can be very poor trainers. Now, if, say, your horse had punishment used, well, one of the things about punishment is that it can be a bit unpredictable for the horse, so that's another problem, which we'll talk about in a sec. But punishment, we know that it doesn't work that well with horses, and that's not to say we never use it. We do use it occasionally, but it's really best if you can be more proactive with your horse. So think about the things you're doing and work out, first of all, whether it's punishment or not, because sometimes we call the same thing correction, and it sounds nicer, but the fact is it's still punishment, and we're just changing the term so it sounds nicer to us, but it doesn't actually change the experience for the horse. People hear the word punishment and they think, oh, you're being nasty to the horse, or you're hitting the horse, you're hurting the horse, and that's actually not necessarily the case. All punishment is defined by the fact that you don't want the behavior to happen in future. So what you're doing something to the horse that is going to make that behavior that you just saw less likely to happen next time. So let's say you've asked the horse to stand still and the horse walks forward. So you tap it lightly on the cannon bone with the whip to ask it to step back. That's punishment. In the same way as, if you bang it really hard with a stick on the cannon bone is also punishment. But both times you want the horse not to do that next time. You don't want the horse to walk forwards, so you get the horse to walk backwards as a punishment for walking forwards. Now, what would be a better thing to do would be, if the horse doesn't want to stand still, would actually first of all be to get the horse to do something moving forward and then offer another opportunity to stand still later. But it would be better to turn that whole situation around and say, right, okay, my horse has energy, and what I want to do then is direct that energy and do something proactive and something useful with the horse so the horse will understand, and then offer it the opportunity to stand still. And it will probably take that. But as soon as it walks forward, my reaction to that is always, oh, that's great, you've got energy. Let's do shoulder control, or, let's do pull your head down. Let's do give to the bit. give a horse a job to do, and then a minute or two later, you can offer it the opportunity to stand still again. You can ask it to stop, offer it that opportunity. The horse will take it, and it will gradually, it'll start standing still for longer and longer and longer. And what's happening is not only is the horse realizing that if you don't have any pressure on it, you're not actually asking it to do anything, so it can just stand still. So your horse is relaxing, which is great. And you're being very proactive rather than reactive. So punishment is always reactive. Punishment is trying to change what's already happened, which you really can't do. So I think that's worth bearing in mind. The last thing is, why horses spook is a lack of confidence. And that comes back to this punishment thing, but also trainers that have been unpredictable. So confidence really for us and for the horse comes from having a predictable environment. Now, we're never going to know exactly what will happen next. Yeah? We don't know that in life anyway. But if we train our own horse, and if we know our own horse very well, we have a fairly good idea of what that horse is capable of. We have a fairly good idea of what might happen next. And that's really the most you can hope for. So by training your own horse and by being really proactive when you're doing so, you form a really good bond with your horse as well, and you understand each other. And that makes it for a very predictable environment for the horse. And that's what horses love. We all know they learn patterns really well. They survive by learning patterns. That's what they do. They see something scary, they run. It's a pattern that's been developed. So what we need to do is teach them really good patterns of behavior, but those patterns that are useful for us as well, because spooking and shying at things is not useful for us. So we need to do something else to change that for the horse, and we need a new pattern. So the spooking pattern develops, very easily. It's the flight response is well ingrained into horses. It keeps them alive in the wild. They need that. So what we need to do is work out how we can change the horse's behavior to suit us without punishing the horse. So what can we do? And I think the first thing that we can do is look at the horse's emotional level. And so what's going wrong when the horse spooks, the emotional level goes from here to here in a flash. And if we've never really done much about that, if we've never really considered the horse's emotional level, we're in a really bad place then, okay? So the first thing to do with all training, with any horse you come across that you're going to ride, or you've just bought, or any horse you come across that you're going to work with, the emotional level is the first thing to address. It's the first thing to be aware of, because if your horse is way too emotional, it is anxious. And you can't teach your horse anything, and it's not a safe place for your horse to be, and it's not a safe place for you to be with your horse. If the horse is bored and asleep, it's not engaged with you, so its emotional level is too low. And you need to increase its emotional level a bit to engage it with learning and to get it into what I call your bubble. And so I talk about this bubble of communication a lot, and I think it's really important. I think it's probably the most important thing to address when you start training your own horse. And it all has to do with keeping the emotional level in what I call the engagement zone. So that's where the horse is more emotional than it would be if it was just standing in the paddock, and it's less emotional than it would be if it was anxious. And there's a nice area in there, which is probably only about between 10 and 15% above resting. So when the horse is just standing in the paddock, but only 10 or 15% above that. So it's not much of an increase, but it's enough of an increase to engage the horse with you. It's enough of an increase to keep the horse interested in what you're asking it to do. So how do we do that? How do we get the horse into that engagement zone and start building that bubble of communication? Well, I find the easiest way, the quickest way, and the most useful way, because we can do any exercise that involves sort of pressure release, for example. So if we have a pressure release exercise, we want something that is going to be useful for us all the time, so forevermore with the horse's training. So if you're going to choose an exercise that meets those requirements, for me, it's give to the bit, because it's a simple, very simple pressure release exercise, and it engages the horse with me, and it's always going to be useful for the rest of the horse's ridden or groundwork life, because it gives you a number of things. Give to the bit gets the horse to understand the pressure release exercise, and it gets the horse in a good posture where it can elevate its shoulders and engage its top line so that it can get its hindquarters underneath it later when we go to address the hindquarters independently. And it's a very useful exercise as well for any groundwork that you're doing. So let's say you've got a horse that's not yet under saddle and you're just starting it. What you want to do is build those top line muscles so that when you do actually get to ride the horse, you've developed those muscles. And the horse, isn't then going to have to suddenly change posture, because as soon as you start working a horse, you're developing muscle, you're building muscle when you work the horse. So you might as well build those muscles that the horse is going to need for the rest of its career. So I always do that, when the horse is young and I'm starting them long before I mount. I'm always building them up, building up their top line, working the horses in frame, in that bubble, so that I'm building the muscles that the horse is going to need to carry me. The horse is learning correct posture, and the horse is learning softness in the bridle and to be engaged with me. So that's why I use give to the bit. You could use any exercise at all. You could use any sort of pressure release exercise, such as put your head down, which you could do in a head collar. You could put a little bit of pressure on the head collar and wait till the head drop, and then release and reward when the head lowered. So really simple exercise to use as well. It's not as useful or not as easy to bring a horse's emotional level down using that, because the horse, there's no movement, not a lot of movement involved. The only movement is the head. Whereas with give to the bit, you can actually get the horse walking or even trotting. So if your horse is already very emotional, for example, if your horse is already spooking, the emotional level might be, let's talk about this for a sec. If we were to judge a horse's emotional level out of 100, so the horse is just standing in the paddock is a 50 out of 100, the horse that's spooking is a 70 out of 100. Now, if the horse's normal rate is at 50 and we want to engage the horse for learning, we want it to be 60 to 65, but not 70. So 70 is too high. So can we just bring it down? That's always the question. I just want to calm the horse down. The problem is we can't force the horse to relax, can we? There's just no way you can force the horse to relax. I did see something on Facebook yesterday about teaching the horse breathing exercises, which I thought was quite interesting. But when your horse is a 70 and spooking at stuff, I don't think it's going to engage with you teaching breathing exercises. So what are we going to do? Well, the thing to do is to actually push up the emotional level just a little bit more. So if a horse is already at 70, I would push it up to 72. Now I can do that simply by engaging it and asking it to do something. So I would give to the bit. Now, let's say my horse is up here and it's like this and it's a 70. I'm going to actually then pick up pressure on one rein and ask the horse to give to that. And that is going to move him up just a little bit. And then he's going to engage with me and think about that pressure. And he's going to give to that pressure, and I'm going to release the rein, and I'm going to reward the horse for doing that with a scratch on the wither. And suddenly we've got this communication going on. The horse is going to say, oh, hang on a minute. I give to that pressure and she releases the rein, she scratches me, and his bubble starts to form. So no longer is he thinking about what's happening out there. His bubble starts to form. The more I do this, the more engaged he becomes and the more relaxed he becomes. And pretty quickly he's down to a sort of 60 and we're getting on really well. Plus he's learning posture and frame and softness in the bridle, which are all really useful things for us to do later. Now, what this really does for the horse is it gives the horse confidence because it's predictable. Horses love patterns. Horses are great learners of patterns. So we need to set up really good patterns for the horses. So what the basic 4 principles of learning for the horse are, there's just 4 of them. We need to work out, first of all, what the spot is on the horse we want to move. Now, you could use any spot on the horse at all. It doesn't matter. So for trailer loading, for example, I only look at one spot, and that's the left front foot. And I trailer load the left front foot because the rest of the horse is attached to that. So I know that if I can get the left front to the front of the trailer and stand there quietly and back off again quietly, that the rest of the horse will go with that left front. So for flying changes, my spot on the horse is the hindquarter. And I want to engage the new hindquarter. So I want to make the new hindquarter more forward under the horse. And I know that if I can do that, the front legs will follow, because horses very rarely only change behind. They'll change in front. The change comes from behind. So by just concentrating on that hind leg and engaging the new hind leg, that will give me the flying change. For give to the bit, for example, the spot on the horse is the nose, and the direction I want it to go is down and a little bit in towards the chest, so the head is sort of in front of the vertical. And so we have a spot, we have a direction. The third thing is a motivator. What are we going to use to motivate the horse to move that spot in that direction? So for give to the bit, I'm using bit pressure. For trailer loading, I'm using the whip. I'm going to tap the horse with the whip on the hindquarter to ask for forward movement. And for flying changes, I might use leg. So I'm going to move my new outside leg behind the girth. So there are 3 different motivators, but they're all pressure motivators. So usually we use pressure to motivate the horse. So then the 4th component, or the 4th principle, is that reward, which is the release of pressure and praising the horse. So we use positive reinforcement there. So praising the horse, a nice, kind, soft words, and plus a scratch on the wither or a stroke on the neck. All of these things are positive reinforcement. And it sets up a great pattern for the horse. So what happens with horses like this that learn in this way, as soon as you establish that with the horse, those 4 principles, every time the horse feels a new pressure or hears a new pressure, because our voice is pressure as well, every time that happens, the horse then starts to look for answers in movement. The horse goes, oh, okay, well, I feel you tapping my hip, for example, with the whip. I'm going to try moving things and seeing when that tapping stops. And, very quickly, the horse develops a shopping list and comes up with all these possible answers. And so it's very predictable for the horse, and you can see the horse actually engage. You can really feel this horse, oh gosh, there's a new pressure. I haven't felt that before. But when we teach a horse, for example, to back up, now I always like to teach the horse to back up just by touching it on the shoulder. So I'm on the ground, at one rein. The first thing I'll do is just touch it on the shoulder. And the horse, you can see the horse, you can feel it's a very gentle touch, it's just a touch, but the horse will start moving. And as soon as you see that foot step back, you release the touch and you praise the horse. And it's, oh, it's very clever. And I think the thing to do is to work out what the first movement is. I always tell the story about how I've taught 2 horses to rear on cue, and just for fun, just because I could, right? I thought it's quite a fun trick. So the first one, it took me 45 minutes to teach it. And I thought that wasn't bad, actually. In the end of 45 minutes, the horse was, rearing quite high, and the horse was, happy with the lesson. It was all fine. I thought that was pretty good, actually. The next time I taught it, which was quite a few years later, I used exactly the same method. I had the horse against the fence. I had the right rein in my hand. I cued the horse with the hip on the hindquarter. Everything was exactly the same. The second time I taught it, it took me 3 minutes. Now, why? Why did I save myself 42 minutes and save the horse, more importantly, 42 minutes? And if I can ever do that, I will, absolutely. Now, the reason is my pattern was better. So what I did the second time was I worked out what the first response was, and I shaped the behavior. So the first time I did this, I waited until I got the response that I was wanting, which was lifting both front feet off the ground. So even just a little bit, so both front feet off the ground. Now, the horse gave me a lot of other possibilities first. It tried to go forward, tried to go back, it kicked out at me, it, did all sorts of things first. And, each time I'd get something close, I'd reward that, but I wasn't being clear enough with the horse. So the second time I realized that before the horse actually lifts its feet off the ground, it's got to raise its head. So I thought, well, maybe if I reward that simple movement of raising your head, and even if its ear just moved up like a centimeter, I rewarded on that. And so in 3 minutes, the horse was actually rearing, as high as me. And that was simply me shaping the behavior. So it became really easy for the horse to understand, because when it got a release from raising its head, it knew that was the answer. So the head just kept going up. So each time I'd ask the head to go up and go up a bit higher, and then it would go up higher. And then the feet have to come with it. To get any higher, there comes a point when you actually have to lift your front feet off the ground. So it's a very easy thing to teach, not something you ever want to teach, of course, because it does get added to your horse's shopping list. So it does mean for both of those horses, whenever I taught something new, I had to be aware that they might throw that in as a possible response. But it just shows that if you can be really clear on what it is you want the horse to do, then it's much easier for the horse to learn that. And so by breaking lessons down like this, it makes it much easier for the horse, and it makes it much easier for you. But I always think, if it can be faster, if your lesson can be faster, then that's got to be a good thing for the horse. The less time it has to spend learning something, the less time it's likely to be confused or frustrated. Because if it's not very clear in our mind, it's really impossible for us to get it into the horse's mind. And what I've found, sometimes I remember years ago when I was doing dressage and things, and I used to get so confused about the simplest things like shouldering. And this simple thing. It's the first step of a 10-meter circle ridden down the long side. But, honestly, you would feel like you're in a game of Twister, left leg here, right leg here, push, push, push. And I just thought, oh my God, it's so confusing. And I didn't have it set in my head what I wanted the horse to do. And I think we really need that. We really need to know that before we start asking the horse to actually perform these movements, because pretty much 99% of what we want the horse to do is very simple. And if it's clear for us, then we can make it really clear for the horse. So the horse that's spooking, the horse that's anxious like that, is a horse where things aren't clear, where its life is unpredictable in some way. And so what our job is as owners and trainers is to make that horse's life predictable, to make it easier for the horse to learn, to make it more enjoyable for the horse. And the thing is that until you go out and start trying these things, there won't be any change. Your horse is never going to get less spooky if you leave it in the paddock and don't do anything with it. Honestly, it just won't. You've got to get out there and start doing stuff. And you will find that even little tiny lessons that you teach your horse are going to improve it enormously. Just start engaging your horse, start building that bubble of communication, and it will pay huge dividends to you and your horse and your partnership in no time at all. Anyway, thank you for today. Thank you for coming along. I'm going to just turn the recording off and then be around for Q&A. So if you're watching and want to ask some questions, stay with me.